January 16th. The time is 8:04 a.m. This workshop is called to order. This workshop is about the School District of Lee County growth and funding options. I would like to mention that there is no public comment in the workshops, and I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. We are delighted to be here this morning to present to you information related to funding options that we have for the school district. As you are aware, we have a significant need for capital. We are continuing to grow at a very fast rate of approximately 1,800 students per year, and we have approximately 10 projects that we need to have completed within the next 5 years. So at this time, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Dr. Desimores, who will briefly take us through what our options are, and then that will provide us ample time for discussion.
Great. All right, so good morning, everyone. We are here, as Dr. Atkins said, to review some of the options relative to the capital funding gap that currently exists in terms of a projected gap of $477 million. We will be just quickly reviewing the options with you. Dr. Desimores will take you through that shortly. And then based on that conversation, you will provide us hopefully today some direction around where you would like to go, and then we will talk about next steps. So what I'm going to do at this time is turn it over to Dr. Desimores, our Chief Financial Officer, who will talk with you briefly about options, and then, like I said, we'll move forward to our next questions that we have for you.
Okay. Great. If you will, you all have the backup information that was given. I'm not going to go through all of it. Of course, it's out there for public information and public consumption so people can see what the background is. Just to shortly go through a synopsis of what brings us to this point. As you all know, beginning in 2008, our school district's tax roll decreased over 40%, while our tax rates at the same time dropped 25% from that 2.0 to 1.5. And at the same time, other sources of capital funding were either eliminated or significantly reduced. So and during the same time period, our FTE, or students, were growing from 1.5% to 2% a year, which is the equivalent of about a high school year, between 1,500 and 2,000 students. So that brought us to the point where we have, from 2008 through to 2017, a reduction of our annual capital revenues from about a little over 300 million to a little over 100 million. So a $200 million annual reduction within those revenues over that period of time. So that shortfall of revenue, along with our growth of students, brings us to the point where the resulting impact is on our capital plan over the next 5 years. We are looking at a funding shortfall of about $478 million, and that's in our 5-year capital plan, given the projects that we have built in. And of course, that also deals with not only capacity expanding projects, such as the new schools that we need to do, but also deals with the renovations, the rebuilds of current schools that need to happen, as well as some deferred maintenance that has gone on in our buildings around the district, in our aging facilities, things that need to happen within those facilities as far as maintenance is concerned, that has not happened because of that reduction in revenue. So along the way, we have discussed various options together, and this has been over several years we've discussed these options, including, number one, more borrowing, certificates of participation, and understand that all of the options that we'll talk about and the things that we've discussed in the past, there's no one option that is the option by itself. Although I do believe that we have some options that are better options based on some of the pros and cons of those options. So we could do more borrowing. Right now, our outstanding principal and interest together is over $500 million. We pay around between $49 and $54 million a year in debt service. We do have the capacity to borrow more should we choose to do so. We're in the process of doing that. You all know that we took out a certificates of participation for Bonita Springs. Given the timeline, we might also do the same thing for the new high school MMM that's on our horizon, and as well the Lehigh Senior High School edition that's on the horizon as well. So we have done more borrowing, and this is an illustration here of what will happen to our percentages and debt service should we choose to take out more borrowing. We do have the option to do that, but of course, and we do get pretty good interest rates, but as you know, the more that we spend on debt, the more that is taken from other things, and we probably will defer more maintenance if we have to spend more of our capital dollars on debt. We've also talked about the possibility of doing an additional property tax. That is not in our hands, it's outside of our hands. As I mentioned earlier, we do have that property tax percentage that moved from 2.0 mils where it used to be down to 1.5 mils, and that maximum is set by the state legislature. So if that were to move, it would have to be a movement that would be approved by the state legislature. We've asked them and lobbied for that each year for probably the past 5 years, and each year we've been unsuccessful with that, and it does not seem likely that anything different will happen over the next several years. So that's one option that we've discussed.
Dr. Esmore, can you explain why that you don't think that's going to occur with the restore the 0.5 mil?
Yes, because you know, the legislature has made it pretty clear that they don't want to and have no desire to restore that property tax rate. So that 0.5 that we lost, which for us each quarter, each 0.25 is about $19 million for us. That's about $38 million based on our current tax roll that is gone and is not available to us because of the action of the state legislature. And they've pretty much told school districts that they have no desire to reinstate that.
Dr. Desmore, so with maintenance, is it cheaper to maintain than it is to fix in the long run?
Well, yes, definitely. It's cheaper to maintain. Preventative maintenance is very important. We have significant assets in the district, in our buildings, in equipment and other things. So it definitely is cheaper to do preventative maintenance along the way when we can. Our maintenance department, of course, does an excellent job of trying to prioritize and doing the things that they feel are most important based on the budget that we have. But there are many things that we've had to defer because of the fact that we don't have all of the available funds to do everything that needs to be done as far as maintenance is concerned for preventative maintenance. And so in the long run, that will cost us more in capital and also in operations because of some of the things that we've had to defer. So if we don't take a different action, it will cost us more down the line.
And so for every time we borrow more money, that's less and less money available for that preventative maintenance. Exactly. And so ultimately it costs us even more in the long run.
That's absolutely correct, yes. Another option that we've looked at is the general obligation bond. That basically is a referendum that would have to go out to the taxpayers for a bond that we would issue on the public market, and the debt service of which would be paid back by an additional property tax that is levied on our property tax owners. This is a bond referendum. It would generate a significant amount of money for sure. One of the things that we've discussed before, though, is it is an additional property tax. It will be borne specifically by only property tax owners within our county, and we do feel like we have other options that would spread that responsibility out more and generate more cash as well. So that's one of the things that we've discussed in the past. The restoration of the impact fee was also another option that we've discussed. As we've discussed before, though, and as the graph would show, I'm going to go back to that graph with the bars and with FTE and money. So, yes. So what you see on top, that red part of the graph, is what we receive from impact fees. So at one point, we did receive back in 2007, you see that was the largest piece of red that we had at about $56 million, I believe, that year. But impact fees, even if they were to be restored to their full 100% capability, would not really come close to filling the gap that we have. And so we have other options that would generate us some more revenue. Mr. Toiber.
And also, we have the categorical restriction that we can only spend that money in the place where the tax was raised. And it seems like the growth sometimes doesn't equal where we need to build schools. So we couldn't even use that money if we needed to in certain instances.
Yes, right, that's a true statement. So the last option then that we've talked about before is a potential sales tax. That would be school districts have the option to levy a half-cent sales tax to generate additional revenue that would be for capital improvements. That revenue, that option would generate revenue for our school district based on last year's sales tax receipts of about $59 million a year. A voter referendum is needed for that. So those are some, and as you can see, based on the other options that we've looked at, that would be the option that would generate the most potential amount of revenue for us and would be a pretty stable source of revenue, and one that would be shared by many different groups, because about 25 to 35% of that revenue actually is generated from tourist type activities. So those are the options that we talked about in the past, and I just wanted to recap those. So for people listening for their information, as well as just to kind of remind us of where we've been. I wanted to update you on some statistics because, oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Just
Toiber, yes.
back to, so a sales tax is not gonna make the district flush with money, it's just gonna help, it's gonna help us get to where we need to be. We still need to continue vigilantly cutting how we spend, making wise decisions as far as how we spend taxpayer money, still going after all the capital things we're doing as far as naming rights and all those things. So we still have a lot of work on our plate that it's gonna just help with the burden. In other words, help us get to where we need to be, but it's by no means a silver arrow.
Right, absolutely. So as you can see by the graph here, the red part is still a shortfall. So we still have, as I said, no one option is the option. We're still going to need some other additional revenue and be able to create some other options. So borrowing will probably still be in that picture, even though it'll be a substantially less amount that we would have to borrow because of a new revenue source. And also, as you said, we will still have to make sure that we're prioritizing and really paying attention to the things that need to be done and we think that are going to give us the best return on the investment that we're making in our capital assets. So absolutely, that's the case.
Dr. Desmars?
Yes.
Can you talk about the local flexibility piece, the restrictions that are placed on us for dollars that originate at the state level versus locally sourced capital dollars?
Yes, absolutely. So we have some more flexibility with how we can use those dollars because they're a sales tax referendum. They're not a revenue source that is deemed to be generated by the state. So many of the restrictions that are placed on some of our other dollars won't come with the sales tax dollars. So for example, I don't believe we're going to have to necessarily have a school that is survey approved if we get, if we get into the state with, some arguments or some discussions about what schools can, we can build or what schools we can't build. There are restrictions on the cost per student station of certain things, which sales tax dollars will come outside of that. So there's some real flexibility that comes with these dollars as opposed to some of our other options.
But they will be designated for capital fund use only?
By statute, they're designated for capital fund use only. Okay. Correct. So we have a few updated facts for you. As of now, we've talked about this before, but there have been some referendums that went through at the end of last year. And so now, as of January 1st, 2018, there are only 6 other school districts in the state of Florida, counties that don't have some other type of additional sales tax on top of the initial 6%. So 61 out of 67 counties have some type of additional tax. 20 of them out there have multiple surtaxes. And right now there are 19 school districts out there that specifically have a school sales surtax like the one that we're speaking of now. And I believe another 29 have local government infrastructure surtax, which is a 1 cent that could be shared with school districts as well as other governmental
And
agencies.
Dr. Desmore, correct me if I'm wrong, but of those 6, we're the only school district that's growing that has no additional funds to pay for growth. Well, at least it's growing for consecutively over the last 5 years.
That is growing at the rate that we are, yes, that is the case. At the rate that we are, I believe that is a true statement.
And also, the state of Florida has no, not little, or no funding formula to pay for growth in capital expenditures.
Not at this point, no. We have our, the PICO dollars are really the only dollars that we receive from the state, and last year, I believe those were a little under $2 million for our district. So, I mean, substantially none.
And Dr. Desmores, we're anticipated to grow by how many students each year?
We're anticipated to grow between 1,500 and 2,000 students a year.
Each year.
What was it this year? Around 1,800?
Last year, around 1,800. We are not done with this year yet. This year, because of the hurricane, our growth patterns, I think, are a little bit stunted. We saw a growth between last year's survey 3 and this year's survey 2 of about 600 students, but it is picking up now. We expect that to continue to pick up. Okay. So that brings us to our timelines here. Well, let me just point out a little bit. We do have we want to talk a little bit about where we are financially, because I think that's important to say in terms of our credit rating. We have a very high quality credit position. We are above the U.S. school district median of AA3, and our credit rating currently stands at a AA2. We have many different areas of financial oversight within the school district, which you all are well aware of. We have our board advisory committees, the superintendent's executive roundtable, which is made up of business leaders within the community. And we have talked about before, and I believe the board has suggested that we have an oversight committee if we were to move forward with a sales tax referendum, in order to look at our project list that we set forward and say, yes, we did, the school district did what they said they were going to do with the dollars that they maintain, and that would be an independent body that would be looking at that. So that brings us to our timelines that we're talking about today, and this is really the question that we need to put on the table for discussion, is for you all to discuss. We do have the elections that are planned within Lee County now, and you see the dates here of the primaries. The decisions that need to be made, and we know that with the supervisor of elections, they need 90 to 120 days notice. And so based on that timeline, we're looking at May at the earliest for an election if we choose to move forward such as that. And so the decisions that we need to discuss and need to make today would be, number one, if we move forward with the resolution. If so, what the date of that would be, what the duration would be, and then our project list that we have to define, and the desire for an oversight committee. So hopefully that was enough information to give you a good overview and a recap of some of the things that we've discussed before. So I leave that on the table, turn it over to the superintendent and the board for any additional discussion.
Well, I think, Dr. Desmores has certainly, laid out our case in terms of need for, building additional schools and the need for additional capital. Our options are somewhat limited, and not all of them are within our control. But I think, again, as she pointed out, if you look at, other legislative solutions, I think we've been given a clear indication that that's not going to come to fruition in the foreseeable future, yet we have the students on our doorsteps today. So additionally, as she did talk about, maintenance is something that continues to be a priority. Right now, we have well-maintained schools, but if we continue to borrow additional dollars to pay for new construction, we're going to have less available to maintain those schools. I think it's a clear case, honestly, if you look at the reductions that we have seen over the last decade. 2006, 2007, you had approximately $318 million capital budget, and in 2016, 2017, it was down to $118 million. The growth is still, that's a $200 million difference, and the number of students continues to grow. We have to build these schools. We're at capacity. If you go out to Lehigh Senior High School right now as an example, you see more and more portables. That is not a good learning environment for students when we should be putting them in student stations that are permanent. So I do think that we need to take some action now. One of the things that is called into question is the difference between a special referendum or going to the general election in the fall. The difference there is we feel that the public deserves really to have a clear conversation about the need for schools today. And if you think about what's coming up in the fall, you have a number of constitutional issues that will probably be on the ballot, as well as just a lot of the normal stuff that goes on with everyone running for political office. If one advantage of a special referendum, it gives taxpayers the opportunity to clearly hear the need. And we want this to be a decision that the public makes with all transparency, so they are fully aware of the need, because I really do not believe that is the case today. I think they do not understand the reduction in revenue that the school district has experienced. When I was speaking yesterday at the Unity Breakfast event, a number of people came up to me after the event and talked about, wow, I had no idea that there had been that degree of reduction in revenue in the school district over the last decade. $200 million is quite a bit. And again, I think that the taxpayers of Lee County deserve a very clear and detailed conversation about this issue. And so I'm concerned that might not happen if we postpone it to the fall. But that is obviously for us to consider today.
I have some questions about the cost of a special election, if I may.
Please.
It's my understanding that the estimate comes in at about $880,000.
$888,000 about, yes.
And so that comes out to about $2.02 per voter.
Mm-hmm.
And comparing that to other districts who have also done special referendums, the next closest to us in terms of cost is Sarasota at $1.44. And then we move down from there to Manatee at $1.28, and then we're at $1.09 and $1 even in other counties. So I didn't have the opportunity to compare the breakdown that the supervisor of elections provided to us to the breakdown of other counties, but I did speak to people in other counties to ask why there's such a difference. And it appears that it is not common practice for supervisors of elections to pay for return postage. And that is about $88,000 of this estimate. It's about a 10% savings if we don't do that. And the other questions I have are how many polling stations would we have, and what would the length of early voting be? Mm-hmm. If we could ask those questions as a supervisor of elections and get that information back to us, I would appreciate it. I'd like to urge the supervisor of elections to look at other counties, work with other counties to figure out how they kept those costs down. Mm-hmm. Because although we're a bigger county, on a per voter cost, the difference in cost it doesn't make sense to me on its face. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I believe the answers to some of those questions are the polling places would be all of the polling places that we would typically have in any election. I'm not sure how many we have within the county, but I will double check that. Yep. And then as far as the early voting, I think the option that they gave us didn't have any early voting in. If we wanted to do early voting, they gave us a number of how much each day of early voting would be in each site of early voting, but it wasn't included within the $888,000 that we received. But we have your questions and can. Yeah.
And the other question I have is, are we doing sample ballot mailings per household or per voter?
We can inquire. Yeah.
And these will be mail-in? There will be the opportunity for mail-in ballots?
Absentee, yes, as typical. It is not, we're not talking a mail-in ballot election only. It is an election where people go to the polls, but a person would have the opportunity to do an absentee ballot if they chose to do so.
Will those be mailed to them? The current list of absentee voters will, or mail-in ballot voters will receive a ballot? Okay.
But I think, to Ms. Patrica's point, I think we need to, if we're trying to be fiscally responsible and prudent with our taxpayers' monies, I think we need to have a conversation and a lot of emphasis on our voters, our supervisor of elections, because if Manatee can do it for $330,000, at a price that's less than half of what we've been proposed. We need to have fiscal responsibility everywhere. I mean, to me, they need to find out how to do it better, faster, cheaper, because Sarasota is a much more conservative district than Lee County is. Believe it or not, that's the truth. It's as red as it gets. And they've not only passed one referendum, they've passed two school referendums in Sarasota over the last 3 years, and they're considering a third one. So, they understand the importance, and Sarasota School District is the #1 district in the state of Florida. They understand what needs to be done to have a high-performing school district, and they've been very transparent. We have not been very transparent or been able to get out to our community, and as Dr. Atkins says, I think it's very, very important that we, do this and do it the right way so we get an informed voter to be able to vote, to be able to show the facts, but we also need to do it fiscally responsible. I do not want to spend $1 million when everybody else is doing it for half the price. I mean, it just seems like if we're going to do things with taxpayers' money, we need to unturn every stone, and everybody along the process, from the county commissioners to our supervisor of elections to the school district, needs to do it the best way possible.
Have we so far given that direction to our supervisor of elections?
Well, we did get an original, I was going to point out, we did get an original estimate from them some time ago of about $1.2 million. We did go back to have a conversation with them to talk about just those things, the comparison of the information that we got from other counties to what they gave us. They graciously went back and reworked some things and came back with this new estimate of about $888,000. So based on their rework, they did reduce the first estimate that they gave us. So we have had some conversation with them.
And I would add that in our meeting with the supervisor of elections, essentially they said that the number they have given us is the absolute limit of what would be charged to us. In fact, it is possible that, I see we're not doing a mail ballot though. Well, even with the return postage on the absentee, the cost will be probably lower than the estimate they've given us. So the per voter cost will go down once the election takes place. This is the most that we would be.
Yes, they did say that whatever estimate they gave us, they definitely didn't want to give us something and then end up that the costs after the fact were higher than what they gave us. So this is what they were viewing as, highest cost based on, worst case scenario, so to speak.
In other words, the cost per ballot, the cost per voter in the other counties was determined after. That's right. It was the actual as opposed to the estimate.
The actual cost, not
Right.
the estimate.
Ms. LaRiviere?
Question, how will they, will the onus be on the voter to contact the supervisor of elections to let them know they would like an absentee ballot? Or is something going to be sent to, or how will they determine who is there another avenue they'll use for getting those out?
I believe the case is the voter has to request the absentee ballot, but we will certainly ask them that question. They are the experts on what the process is, so we will ask that question.
Because I know in the last election cycle, we received notification from them with a form to fill out asking if we wanted an absentee ballot for both the primary and the general election. So my question is that how they're going to find out, or will people have to email, call, whatever. So that's a curiosity.
Okay. They have a line item in their estimate for the sample ballot ad. So I'm thinking that they will send those out, and then people have to send it back in to request their absentee ballot, if that's what they choose to do. However, like I said, they're the experts on the process, so we have that question down, and we'll make sure
Thank
to
you
double
very
check.
much.
So another clarification around that, when I filled out my form for a mail-in ballot, they said it would be good for 2 years. Will that not include this election or for every election in 2 years?
Got it,
So
okay.
maybe I'm already on the
Yes.
list.
Okay,
you.
got it, okay. Understood, we'll find that out, yeah.
Okay, other questions, Ms. Giovanelli?
Well, I'm just now hearing about the special election. I just found out on Wednesday, so we had never discussed this when we've talked about this. It was a work in progress, and that we were working on having an efficiency audit. So what's the status on the efficiency audit? I mean, that was part of what what we were trying to do with our community, is to educate ourselves, including what is, how we're doing as a district. So I'm a little surprised, I'll be honest. On Wednesday, I was surprised when I found out that we were discussing, are going to be discussing the audit with a quick meeting for 8 o'clock today, a week, notice. So, I mean, I don't understand the rush. This is a lot of money to spend for as a taxpayer, and I don't feel like that's looking well upon us as rushing this when we have an election coming in August, primary, and I just thought we were going to work on towards getting the community's awareness and then putting it on for August, if that's where the community had input and that's what the community wanted. So, and I'm a little surprised.
I believe that, I believe the point is to make us aware of it can be done as a special election, and if we decide we don't want to go that route, we always know we have the primary. I think part of it is giving us a knowledge base so we know that expenditure, what it possibly would be. Primary election, I want to look at the statistics, because I know that the last time that I ran and I won, and that was all county, we only had 27% of the voters vote in that one. And there is a potential that if we do something like a special election where people are given more knowledge, we will have more input than just 27%. I want to hear, so I'm curious, and I'm curious to see what happened with other other counties, what the participation was in those counties when they did a special election compared to the participation when it was done in a primary election. Does that make sense? I want to make sure, I want to do everything in our power so that we are fully putting this out there so people are knowledgeable. This is our community of Lee County making a decision of how we move forward.
Right.
And then the onus is on the community. Should they choose not to, then how are we going to take care of this? Because we can't keep up with that.
Okay, so I saw the first hand was Ms. Patrica, then we'll go to Dr. Cockle.
Can I go a little bit out of order here and ask my fellow board members for consensus regarding the underlying issue, which is the sales tax? Do we have support amongst our board members to pursue a sales tax? And then can we have the conversation about the date of the election?
I agree.
Okay, so the question is, do we have consensus? So do we want to do a thumbs up?
Let's just make comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Not voting
Okay.
today.
Okay, so comments about
I
Mrs.
support the sales
Patrica's
tax.
question.
I support the sales tax.
I support the sales tax.
I'm on the fence because I want to hear what the community has to say. I can't support a special election at this time.
That's not the question.
That's not the question. The question is.
Do you support the sales tax?
Period, regardless of how it,
I'm on the fence.
I support the resolution.
Yeah, and I support the resolution in the sense that if we talk about the ability for us at this point, we have said, this has been over a year now, that we have tried every method. I said I would not support the sales tax, and if you recall, when I came on this board, returned to this board, I will not support blatantly a sales tax until we've exhausted every avenue. This board has worked with a concerted effort with our legislative group, and we have a great delegation, but the bottom line is every other district has found another means for funding. So we're up there with one district speaking by ourselves. So there, and our delegations flat out said, there's just not enough fanfare to be able to get that. We're in a very powerful consortium, and when we start bringing up to bring back the 0.5 mil, everybody just kind of looks at their fingers because they've all addressed it within their own district. We have not. And so we're out there by ourselves. Then we talk about growth. Of the 67 districts, there's only a handful of us that are having growth year after year. We've asked the legislature, give us a funding formula so when new students come to your district, that we have a place to be able to build seats and put brick and mortar. And they look and go, really not hearing a whole lot of groundswell, because we're the only county in the situation. So we're not going to get any help from Tallahassee. So now we take a look at, well, what can we do internally? Well, we're working on fiscal responsibility, and the audits will show that. And I think you've had discussions with the superintendent to walk you through all this, Melissa. So I'm really surprised that this is a shock to you, because it shouldn't be a shock to anybody, because this is a conversation we've had repeatedly with the superintendent, at least I have. And so now we take a choice. You know, we everything we can put a name on, we've sold, and we're continuing to sell, whether it be ball stadiums or whatever, naming rights as far as advertising on our website. We're doing everything we can to generate funds. We're just not going to get there. So now we take a look at, do we want to continue to tax, to borrow and burden our future, you know, our children and our community members as it goes on, and we start getting our debt to be super, super high. We're at the point now where we're spending $84 million a year in debt service. I mean, that's just throwing away money. You know, in 2010, when we had a PM system where we replaced roofs and HVAC units and buses on a repeated level, you know, on a PM maintenance, we could afford to do that with our capital. We can't do that now. If you take $118 million and you take out $65 million a year in construction, that only gives us $55 million to service 127 odd buildings. You know, this is taxpayer buildings that if we don't maintain, become worthless. We just can't be prudent by continuing to borrow money and keep kicking the can down the road. So at this point, you know, we have no other choice. And as you saw for the graph, this isn't a silver bullet that's going to save all our woes. We still have a huge burden amongst this board and this superintendent to continue to be better stewards of the money and be more efficient. But at this point, to not do a sales tax, to me, would be fiscally irresponsible, so I'm in support of it.
So I just want to clarify, when we said we are for the sales tax, we went around that we are really for putting the referendum forward. We are moving forward with a resolution, or have consensus around that, and give the Lee County voters the opportunity to
make
vote,
the decision,
to
to
make
tell
the
us.
decision.
Correct.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we're gonna go back around just for a moment here.
Well, I want,
Okay.
Mr. Martin is
Please.
going to be weighing in on behalf of Mrs. Fisher, who's unable to be
Okay,
here.
thank you.
Ms. Fisher
Yes.
was unable to be here today, so she asked me to share her comments on
thank
this
you.
issue. This is what she shared. First, I appreciate the work that has been done in recent months to move the idea forward. I have reviewed the agenda and the backup data and am satisfied that all points previously reviewed have been covered. Secondly, I have advocated for taking a sales tax referendum to the voters for some time, so if the question arises again, I do support doing so.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of hands up.
So, community input, in terms of community input, we have 3 advisory committees that are made up of members of the public who have given their time and talent to this district to take a deep dive into our budget, not to mention the superintendent's roundtable, who have recommended that we pursue a half penny sales tax. And that was a long time ago. And I know that this board, in several workshops and several briefings, we've seen this data over and over and over again. Our Finance Advisory Committee has recommended that we move forward with this. Our Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee has recommended that we move forward with this. Our District Advisory Council has shown overwhelming support for this. So I'm comfortable with the feedback from the public. Not only am I comfortable with their feedback moving forward, but I would find it difficult to ignore their advice at this point. Because of the support that they've shown for this. I mean, they've basically said to us, this is what you need to do in order to get out of this situation. So I feel comfortable with the community feedback I've received up to this point. The other thing too is when we were at that Unity breakfast yesterday morning and you said, we have lost $200 million in funding over the past decade, there was a gasp. I mean, there was an audible gasp in the audience. People could not believe. So in terms of, and the final point I'll make is I go to groups over and over. I was at the ECCL just last week. People don't understand our financial situation, and when you get in front of them and you explain our financial situation, there is, again, overwhelming support. I've yet to hear anybody in the public say to me, no sales tax, unless it's an ideological opposition to sales tax, period.
Right.
Any ideological opposition to sales tax, of course, they're not going to be in favor of this. And I have to say that before I sat on this board and before I became familiar with this data, I was one of those people. I was a no tax under any circumstances voter. Obviously, it becomes different when you take a deep dive and you figure out what the situation is. So.
Okay, we're going to continue around the table. Dr. Cockle?
Yeah, I think some people don't understand also that there's a separation between operation and capital. Capital is our building, it's our maintenance, capital is our transportation, all of those things. And when you talk about an efficiency audit, well, these things are simultaneous. We're doing efficiency audits now, we have that in process, but we have no choice but to house every student that crosses our threshold. So we have we're gaining by about 2,000 students a year, and it's equitable to put all students in the same kind of environment, educational environment, and without that, we're in jeopardy. So it's non-negotiable that we house our students, and that comes from capital fund, very separate from anything related to operations.
Thank you. Dr. Desmores, can I ask a point of clarification? Mr. Toiber was speaking before about the amount of debt that we carry as a district. Do you have an approximate amount of dollars that we pay per day on debt service?
Yeah, it's between $49 and $54 million within our 5-year plan.
Okay.
And right now, that's at about $124,000 a day.
Okay. All right. So the cost of this election, if it were to proceed, could be paid for approximately within how much time? About a week?
Right,
Okay.
correct. So the amount
Just a
of
point
debt
of
that we could
clarification.
potentially mitigate by the additional dollars that we bring in, again, we would see a very quick return on that investment of the special election if it were to cost $888,000, basically in less than a week based on the principal and interest we pay right now. So, you know, an $888,000 one-time investment for what could potentially be a $59 million plus a year return.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Ms. LaRiviere.
I am in support of moving forward with the resolution. I'm fully in support of that. And part of the reason, it is my understanding that we will be looking at when there will be a sunset, you know, and how long that is. It is not forever and a day. We're not looking at even asking it to, I don't think we would be asking for it to be there for 50 years. You know, that's not the goal. The goal is to put it in for a certain time, be responsible with that, and then see what happens following that.
What is
I'm
our
a very
proposal?
conservative. I'm very fiscally conservative. And my husband is even more so. And as we've looked at this, we've decided this is a true, pardon me, but for people out there, this is a true conservative Republican tax, because it's something to totally pay off the debt and for a specific purpose that's being seen and with oversight. I don't see any reason not to move forward with this, and we've become the mentality, and many people out in the community that I speak with have said before, I never would have said yes to it, but they say, this is a no-brainer. There's no other option. How are we going to move forward?
Okay.
What is the projected term?
So we want to take just two more comments very quickly, Dr. Kuckel, if you'll allow me to just get a few more questions answered, and then we are going to move on with the questions that we have present. So Ms. Giovanelli and then Dr.
Well,
Atkins.
I was just gonna say, it's 10 years, I believe, right? And my thought process is I would like to see like a schedule of, I mean, I know we have schools to build, so I'm not denying that, and I'm not questioning that. I just want to make sure that the community does understand what we're asking. So if a 10-year plan, I know the schools at the rate of 2,000 students a year, I mean, that's, in 2 years, that's not going to be sufficient. And, you know, we've got to build the schools regardless. And we've been doing that. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that's out there, you know, clear. But, because, I mean, I don't think 10 years is enough initially, but, I mean, I want to see the plan. I think we have to support that as well if we're going to do this.
Okay, and that's a conversation we're going to move to in just a moment. Dr.
Okay.
Atkins.
I just think that it's better use of taxpayer dollars, because we have to build these buildings anyway, because you have 1,800 students coming in every single year. It's better to spend them directly on the buildings than to give money to a bank. I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel, because if we're taking on more debt, that's what you're doing. You're paying down more debt. That's money that's going to a bank instead of building a school. So I just think this is a better way to go.
Okay, so with the board's permission, we'd like to move forward with some of our questions. So we're hearing, we heard the desire of the board. We heard that there was somebody on the fence. We also heard that most of the board would like to move forward, you know, toward that resolution. So in order to do that, we would like to talk with you about some recommendations we have as staff, and then you weigh in on that and please give us direction. We want to honor what you would like us to do as a board. So the first question is the date of the election. And we know that if we are to proceed with a special election, that we must provide the supervisor of elections with a minimum of 90 days notice is what we have heard. So that puts us, by the time it gets through the commission and all of that, that puts us in May, is what we're looking at. We have suggested a date perhaps of the middle of May, May 15th, Tuesday, May 15th, but we're open to your discussion on that.
Can we go in the opposite direction? Only because
Please.
I'm, you know, on these issues, I've said this before, I
Yes.
get stuck in my own head because I can't talk to you guys about this stuff. So I want to hear your thoughts and see how they impact mine. Is it fair? We go the opposite way.
Oh,
Sure, of course,
Please. Yeah.
absolutely. So May 15th, we just want to have that conversation about a projected date. How you feel about that?
Well, I'll start. My concern about the general election is that it will be a very lengthy ballot. We will be at the bottom, as we always are, and I'm just concerned that there will be a lot, the public will be overwhelmed with information advocating for or against a number of things on that ballot, and I think we'll get lost. I'm concerned about the primary because we are a closed primary state. Now, it's true that even if there are no Democrats on the ballot or no Democratic races on the ballot, people may vote on resolutions that are nonpartisan. But the fact of the matter is, and as Mrs. LaRiviere has said, the turnout tends to be really low. And I think what we want is a solid indication from the public. Either we want them to say yes in an affirmative way or no in an affirmative way. We don't want something on the fence. We want to clearly understand what the public feels about school growth, supporting growth, school growth supporting the economy, etc. So I am for the standalone. I am for paying the cost of doing it. I do not think it is an irresponsible expenditure of taxpayer dollars, because I think it's maximizing the opportunity of the public to be involved in the decision. So that's...
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Toiber?
I have to agree with Ms. Morgan in a sense that it's all about the information and what our voters are going to experience when they go in the voting booth. And my big fear is, you know, I pulled up the Constitutional Revision Committee. There's 8 constitutional revisions coming on, and they range from removing an outdated amendment to the constitutional law that allows aliens ineligible for citizenship to be prohibited from owning land. And then they have to explain, this amendment is in keeping with the late 19th century and early 20th century federal laws that barred many Asians from citizenship, and those laws have been repealed. So then one. Then the second one, deleting a portion of the state constitution that bars state money from being spent directly or indirectly in the aid of any church, sect, or religious denomination, or in aid of any sectarian institution. And it goes on and on. There are 8 very convoluted, comprehensive issues that are going to just be out there, and there's going to be groups for and against it, and we have to try to get above the din about our issue. And to be honest with you, school boards, I mean, we don't get a whole lot of attention. We're below the radar on most issues, even though we're the largest impact on people's property taxes. So it's very disturbing. And, you know, not too long ago, I was out at Pine Island when this conversation, immediately in November, when I got elected, there was somebody mentioned the sales tax. I got a call the next day. Come out to Pine Island, come speak to us. And there was 36 people in a room. I went out there and I took a vote. How many people are in favor of sales tax? Nobody raised their hand. I spent 2 hours with them, informing them exactly what we're facing and all the facts and the data. At the end of that conversation, everybody raised their hand in support of the tax once they knew it, except for one person. And I said, well, I haven't got your vote. And he said, well, I understand everything, and I know what you're going to do, and I know you're going to put it in news press and show you're going to do it, but the state's still going to change it. They're going to get in there and change the laws and take away your money and redirect it and put another categorical, just like they did with lottery, you know, a sales lottery. And I said, you know, I can't change what the state legislature is going to do to us. And I said, but I still, you know, he goes, I would raise my hand, but for the state legislature. So I had 35 yeses after 2 hours, but it took that type of time to give them the information and the data. And I believe we still have a huge task on our hand, even if we have our own special election, to educate all of our groups. Exactly. But to try to do it in the fervor of the gubernatorial election and all the things going on, we don't have a prayer. I really believe, because I've heard so many times in my church and in my community groups, if in doubt, just say no. And the constitutional revisions, they're going to say, just in doubt, still say no. And we're in that same ballot of that 10 or 12 page voter ballot. We're just going to be in there. And I don't want to have the decision for the taxpayers. Do we borrow more money, or do we let the sales tax cover some of that expense? Does that question, I don't want that lost in the din.
Yeah. Steve, I'm smiling or laughing a little bit at you because you're not an educator, but you did the equivalent of a pre and post test with your pineapple. So kudos to you.
Okay, other comments, thank you. Other comments?
I support what already has been said. The funding for schools is so complex that until we have their individual attention in an election, no one will understand and continue to be confused. And when they're confused, then they generally vote no. So I am very much in support of having this as an individual thing for us, so we can explain, answer questions, and make sure that folks understand there's a difference between operations and efficiency, and we're working on that. But we have no choice but to house the students that come in. And $880,000 is a lot less than $124,000 a day to pay for our mortgage payments.
Okay, so you're supportive of that conversation and the special referendum going out. Okay. Other comments, other questions?
I have a lot of points to make if you'll
please
give me some time. So I've looked into this quite a bit. If we don't hold the election in May, our staff could be forced to create 2 budgets. One addressing the contingency of we potentially have a half-penny sales tax, one addressing the contingency that we don't. If they don't engage in 2 budgets, then we can't plan to utilize those funds until 2020. So do we want our staff expending the time and resources associated with creating 2 budgets? And we're talking about more than just finance department here. We're talking about education services, we're talking about technology, we're talking about transportation, and we're talking about maintenance. So what do we want to do? Do we want to have Dr. Creel and her group in academic services focused on creating 2 budgets, or do we want them focused on the first goal of Vision 2020, which is increasing student achievement, and included in that is decreasing the achievement gap. Do we want Trey and his group in information services focused on creating 2 budgets, or do we want them focused on providing the best technology possible for our students? So that's the first concern I have, or the first reason why I would like to see us do a special election. The other is, I watched, to go to your point, I watched the Sarasota County School Board meeting where they decided to seek the special referendum this coming March. And like us, they have a group of dedicated citizens that are working outside the district to support them in the pursuit of their referendum. The leader of that group got up and spoke to the board. The leader of that group has successfully passed 2 referendums, and he's in the process of helping them pass their current referendum. And he said several things that were very interesting to me. First, he said that the best way to defeat the referendum is to not have a special election. I'm going to repeat that. He said the best way to defeat the referendum is to not have a special election. It's impossible to properly educate voters about the need for student funding and the needs of our students amongst the cacophony of other issues and other candidates that exist in both primary and general elections. He further stated that the cost for his group, for this outside group, to support a referendum election is up to 3 times greater in a primary or a general election because of the cost of getting the message out and making that message be heard above the other messages that are, am I making sense? Above the other messages that are present with other candidates and other issues. And you know, the news and the citizens are going to be more focused on the federal and the state issues. And so the importance of our message will be crowded out if we wait until a primary or a general election. And for me, the bottom line is we really have to give our students the best chance at success. And I believe a special election is the best chance at success. Finally, fiscal responsibility is something I've heard a lot from my constituents over the past several days. Chris, employ common sense. Chris, be fiscally responsible. Spending $880,000, if that's what it costs, on a special election is fiscally irresponsible. And you know what, my first reaction to that $880,000 price tag, I think, Melissa, you mentioned the same thing. My first reaction is, wow, that's a lot of money. But I wasn't elected to react. I was elected to think, and I was elected to analyze. And when you look at that $880,000 price tag in the context of our overall budget, and in the context of the amount of money that will be generated by the tax, it makes common sense to me to seek a special election. So at a conservative estimate of $50 million a year revenue generated from this tax, after 1 year, $880,000 is 1.76% of the amount of revenue that would be generated. Over 10 years, it's 0.18%, and over 15 years, it's 0.12% of the overall, the cost as compared to the amount generated. So when I analyze it, which is what I've been tasked to do by the voters and by the taxpayers of Lee County, when I analyze it, it makes sense to me to spend $880,000 in order to capture a potential $500 million from the community in support of what our students need. Does that make sense? Does that analysis make sense? So I believe it is commonsensical, and I believe that it is fiscally responsible to do what's best for our kids. That's the bottom line here. I know that we're getting a lot of political pressure, and that political pressure comes from that reaction, the reaction to $880,000. My initial reaction was the same. But if we could analyze it within the context of the reality of our financial situation, I think it's prudent for us to do this.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, other questions?
No, I just, and
One more thing about
Sure,
Sarasota.
you go right ahead.
Sorry,
Go right
because
ahead.
you asked about Sarasota. If you look at their voter turnout in primary elections as opposed to the special elections that they've had for their school board referendums, the turnout for the special election is equal to or greater in the special elections than it was in their primary elections.
okay, thank you. Initially, yes, you sit there and stun. And I agree, you did a very good job in your analysis. I am so glad that you also have that background at looking at investments. It comes through as not only are you good at the legal part, but you've also had that expertise at looking at investments. I believe, and so I started to think about, okay, Michael and I just put a whole big, we put that money into an investment. I would never see this kind of a return on an investment as we're going to be able, possibly can get. And again, I truly believe, I believe this needs to be a focused vote by our constituents. And let's put all the information out there. Let's have them vote, and let's have them vote wisely and understanding. And people, and I just ask, and what we will all need to be asking is when people come up and say, well, what about this that you did irresponsibly? And I'll say, fine, please, can you show me exactly what that is so I can get back with you? 9 times out of 10, when they come to me, they don't have anything to produce. It's all hearsay. And so I just, yeah, I'm behind this.
So special election?
Special
okay,
election.
Just to clarify, okay. All right, any other comments, questions?
So what we have is, again, the same response. The board at this point is in favor of the special election, the superintendent recommending a special election.
I'm not sure that, did we hear from Jane and Melissa on the issue of date of election? I'm not sure we heard.
You're
from-
right, we didn't.
I'm sorry.
We went
No,
around this way.
I'm
We
in
skipped that.
favor of a May election.
And I'll play a little devil's advocate. We went from 5 to 7, and that wasn't a special election for our board members. That was put on the ballot, and it was voted in. I, for one, remember distinctly voting that in and looking for it. So, I mean, as a voter, we are educated, and if we're not, that happens. That's every election. That's never going to stop. That's never going to change. And so, I mean, I believe that it can happen on a general, just as if it's supposed to happen, it will happen. And we have time to get our our voices heard and our message out. I just don't feel like we've completely. You said we were given information about the efficiency audit. I've never received any information about the results of an efficiency audit. So if I'm the only one that doesn't have that information, I need to know that.
No,
No,
the
not
information
efficient.
we have is that we're engaging
In the audit,
Right.
but
Right.
also the discussion, as far as you said, this is the first time you've heard about the special election and the first time you've heard about the discussions that we were going to move this forward. This is discussions that I've had with the superintendent for the last 2 months.
I found out about a special election was Wednesday. It was never discussed to me. So I do not know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, I put that on superintendent.
So
But-
additional questions, yes, please.
Well, just to Melissa's point, I can't tell you how many times over the last 2 or 3 years that when people, first off, most people don't even realize that we went 5 to 7, and then when they found out that when they voted for 5 to 7, voters used to have votes for 5 different board members. Now they only have 1 and the 2 roving, so they only have votes for 3, and there's 7 members on the board, so that any voter in Lee County now does not have the ability to control the majority of the school board. And when people find out about that, they get incensed. It's like, well, it was on the ballot. Yeah, it was on the ballot on page 4, and it wasn't enough information. It didn't delineate that you're losing 5 countywide members are now becoming 5 district members that you only get to vote for your particular district. You lose 4 of those votes, and you get to pick up 2 of the at-large. People were very upset. And again, and it all goes back to the fact I wasn't, when that vote happened, I wasn't even on the board, but there's no way to get in the whole din of that general election for this school district to get out and say, you understand what you're voting for. It just got lost on people, and people went in there and voted, better, more representation. I'm for it. Well, it's really not more representation, it's less, but you had to be able to understand the nuances, and we just didn't do a good enough job of the district to explain that to people. And plus, you know, I mean, I believe the 7 was the appropriate thing to do. As far as how it got broken up is subject to interpretation to everybody else, but that just goes to the point that the information that people were not educated when they made that decision, and a majority of the people had no idea the implications. And now we're talking, and that was just on representation. Now we're talking about money, and we're talking about a whole lot of money. And I think that every voter deserves the opportunity to have, and to get out there, and I hope this, you know, the media's here, you know, whenever we go forward on for a special election, I hope every single interest group and every single taxpayer takes the opportunity to call the district, because I will sit down with anybody, any group, and this whole board has already voiced their support that they will go out anywhere to any group and speak to this information, because it is very critical that you know everything that's going on. And we've worked very hard to get the information, so we're all speaking from the same data. And you saw the presentation that's available today is available to everybody. We want to be as transparent as we can to let everybody know these are the numbers. And if you have a choice, if you have an option to say how we can get there from here better than what we've got, we're all ears, because we've asked that now for years, and everybody says, well, you just need to cut costs. Well, we have to build schools, we have to provide computers and the infrastructure, the costs are there, and we're trying to find better ways, and people bring up the Bonita School. Well, look how you blew the number there. And if you look at the data, the cost of that school is in line with every other building of school facilities across the state of Florida, and actually better with our value reductions that our Construction Advisory Committee is giving us. It's actually better than most places in the state, and the number that they originally gave out was just wrong. So that issue, how that was done, not only was that problem rectified, the entire construction process has been reviewed and overhauled. So it's not as if the things aren't getting better, but if you take a look at the spending of taxpayer dollars, it is better or the same as anywhere in the state of Florida on Bonita. So Bonita was not a mistake. It was just the one presentation to the board was a mistake. But the cost, it never cost the taxpayers more, and that is all just, again, fake news. You want the facts? We'll give you the facts, but you need to make your decisions based upon the facts.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins.
Just, I want to address the concern that came up earlier. I did not go to board members and say special election, not special election. That type of conversation didn't happen, but I think that an educated board has, as we've been going along talking about funding options, these things come up in conversation. When we really had the real serious consideration about the special elections, when you go and you talk to the supervisor of elections, and they even expressed concerns about the number of items that were on the general election and how that might be lost in the shuffle. And that's where we really start to look at a date to get out there in front of that general election. You know, and that's when you start backing it up, when you look at the 90 days and the 120 days and so forth. So I don't want you to feel that you were left out of the conversation. I think, you know, quite the contrary. We talk quite a bit about funding issues and when the timing of this, again, like I said, comes up in conversations, but never did we have a conversation about, all right, are we going to do this or that? Because we had to get more information, quite frankly. I mean, this is something that has been an ongoing conversation with county commission, has been an ongoing conversation with board members, has been an ongoing conversation now with, not ongoing, but the conversation with the supervisor of elections certainly helped with this decision and recommendation.
Okay, Ms. Giovanelli?
Well, and timing is everything. So, and for me, I was still in the process of processing and getting our information. I was waiting on the efficiency audit, hoping that was going to be supportive because everybody's wanting that information. I was on the finance committee, and that was information that, you know, we look forward to, and I think that would only help our situation in moving forward with the tax. So that's, I guess for me, I'm hanging on my hat on that, waiting on that. So, you know, I feel like we're rushing it, and like I said, timing is everything. And, you know, doing a special election, you know, is alarming for me because it is money. I really want to be fiscally responsible. And the only way to do that is to be lean and to prove that and show that we are. And so I just look forward to the efficiency audit information. So I guess maybe I'm hanging my hat on that. I don't know. I just think the most information and getting it out there is what's most important, because it's up to our community.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, if I can, I just wanted to weigh in a couple things on the timeline to, answer a couple of questions that were there. The efficiency audit is underway. Of course, the board approved that. We've been working with Gibson Consulting for quite some time, getting together, them asking for certain pieces of data from the district so that they can gather those things, analyze them, and then come back to us with some recommendations of where they think, if anywhere, we might need to look into deeper. They will actually be here on site for for interviews and additional discovery purposes the week of January 29th. The original timeline, though, that we had talked about with the board, and at this point I don't know that timeline has changed any, is that any recommendations from them would be coming in the April timeframe. I think in the meantime, we have all types of information that we had discussed before about our credit rating, about the people that we've worked with within the community with the superintendent's roundtable, about our board advisory committees that are set up to look at our processes and give us recommendations, and they have done so. So I think all of that information collectively is kind of what we've talked about. That brings us to information at this point. We continue to be in open book, so whatever information we get from the efficiency audit, we will be able to discuss. So I just wanted to lay out that information. Dr. Atkins, if you wanted to add to that.
Well, just to understand, an efficiency audit is not going to get us, reductions and savings that would be anywhere near saving, to pay for what we have to do. One of the things about the sense of urgency here is that, we have been talking about this need probably for 4 or 5 years. Okay, I remember, it was Dr. Graham was the superintendent when Mark Mora sat over there and really laid out a case for why we really need to get out there right now and start considering building these buildings. And we did not move forward at that time, even though we really needed to. And as a result, we as a district are having to take on additional debt, which again is dollars that do not directly benefit our students. These are, so the more debt we take on, the more we're losing in terms of the building of infrastructure here in Lee County. So the sense of urgency for us is that because that decision wasn't made 4 years ago, that we have kids in portables, we have classrooms that are, we have too many students in them, and as we're waiting on these other buildings to get built, that overcrowding is only going to get worse. So I understand we can fund those temporarily with COPS, but I think it would behoove us, because we know we have to pay for this. Let's pay for it now with real dollars, so we're not taking on more debt, and which will also help us to preserve our other assets, because we'll have additional, we don't have to make reductions in maintenance, which we've already made. I mean, back in the day, back in that 2000, 2007, we were able to do a rotational maintenance budget that really kept us, ahead of the game from a maintenance perspective. Now we're no longer there. Now we're in a situation where if an HVAC system breaks, then we fix it, but we're not able to provide the maintenance on a rotational level that we'd like to be able to do. Now the guys are doing a great job, I think, when it comes to some of the big capital assets like HVAC systems, but the other stuff, roofs, buses, which we've had to do leases for that. And then stuff just in terms of general appearance and painting and those type of things, we don't keep up with it as well as we would like to be able to. And then let's also remember that we just took a major hit from this hurricane, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $21 million that we had to pull. Is that close.
25? Yeah.
$25 million that we've had to pull out of our reserves. So that's, again, we're going to have to do that, and you know how long it's going to take FEMA to come back and reimburse us for that. I mean, they're still waiting on money from Matthew and other hurricanes, I believe. So I think it is an urgent situation, in terms of us getting at least moving on this construction. I think it's just a better option to do it with actual dollars rather than borrowed dollars.
Thank you. I'm going to move over to Ms. Patrica. I saw your hand.
So,
Thank you, Dr. Atkins.
we know we have an outside group supporting this. The outside group has, I think we're in an incredibly good position that we had an outside group approach us and say, we've gone out, we've gathered some information. This is a viable option for you, Lee County School Board, if you move now. That's the key. When I go into a meeting with you or with your staff, I expect a level of expertise from you. I expect that you've done your homework. I expect you've done your research. I expect that you've looked at other successful districts across the state, borrowed and stolen from what they do, and apply it here. Looking at other successful districts across the state and the referendums that they've done for sales taxes, it is a special election. Everything we've talked about in terms of our voice and our message being lost in the noise of a primary or a general election, this is the best opportunity for success for our students. The bottom line is what is best for our students, not what's the best for me as a conservative Republican and as a member of the Republican Party, but what is the best thing for our students. The best thing for our students is to engage in a process that is most likely to be successful. The information that we've gotten from experts in this area and by analyzing the efforts of other districts points us in the direction of we need to do a special election because this is what's best for our students. Now, take that and combine it with the financial analysis that I've already laid out for you. This is a sound financial investment for our students. 0.12%. The cost is 0.12% of revenue that would be generated over 15 years. And if we go with a 10-year time frame, it is 0.18%, 0.18% of the revenue that would be generated over a 10-year period of time. I think, sitting in my seat, it would be financially irresponsible to not give our students the best opportunity for success, to not give our students what they need. And let's think about not just students. Let's think about people who don't have kids in schools. Let's think about voters and taxpayers. What is the number one driver of economic health in any community? Schools. Schools. Quality schools. What is the number one thing that drives property values?
Schools.
Schools.
Quality.
This is our responsibility. This is not an easy decision. This is not easy. Nothing about this, preparing for this meeting has been easy for me. But the bottom line is, I've committed to doing what's best for students, not what's best for me politically, but what's best for students. And I believe a special election is that. The Finance Committee has recommended this and the conduction of an efficiency audit at the same time. They didn't say complete the efficiency audit first and then move on with a half-penny sales tax. They have recommended both at the same time. And I want to talk about the Bonita Springs thing, the Bonita Springs High School thing. So I went to the open house at Dunbar the other night, and Carl Burnside, the principal there, gets up in front of the group and he says, I want to address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that certain perceptions come along with the name Dunbar. And then he proceeded to have parents, current students and former students get up and talk about their experience at Dunbar High School, which is the complete opposite of the perception of the word Dunbar, right? So there's a perception out there about Bonita Springs High School. My understanding of the facts of Bonita Springs High School are different from that perception. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of the timeline, but from what I understand, 10 years ago was the last time we had a major build out of a school, right? We were $22 million over budget at that time. The public was not made aware of that. This is a different board, this is a different superintendent. When you found out that there was a budget overrun at Bonita Springs High School, that was on a Thursday, you immediately met with board members the following Monday, I was one of them, and you told me about that situation, and then the next available opportunity to bring it to the public at a briefing meeting, you did that. So what we had in place when the Bonita Springs High School estimates were done was a staff one member of which had been deeply involved in the construction 10 years ago. One member of staff who no longer works for this district, one member of staff was involved in that. No member of your cabinet was involved in that. So we had a process in place that we had no reason to believe was broken.
Exactly.
Should we as a board have known, should you as the superintendent have known? I suppose that we should have, but I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't perceive that something is broken unless an indication is given to me that it's broken. We didn't know it was $22 million over budget, so we used the same processes that had been in place 10 years ago. We found out that those processes are broken. We have turned to our community. We've turned to our construction professionals in our community. We've turned to our financial professionals in our community, and we've asked, what about this process is broken? And like Mr. Torber said, we have fixed that process, and we have been updated as a board over and over and over again about the updates and the changes to those processes to make sure that we're not in this situation again. So to say that we were fiscally irresponsible on Bonita Springs High School, I get how that might be the public perception, but in terms of the processes and the steps that we've taken in this district, I'm proud of what our staff has done with regard to Bonita Springs High School, with regard to taking responsibility for what happened and making sure it doesn't happen again. So that's my version of addressing the elephant in the room.
Okay, Ms. LaRiviere, thank you.
We are now at the point where we're needing to share our capital dollars that we do receive from the state. So what is, Dr. Atkins or Dr. Desamore, what is our capital shortfall that we are going to be experiencing now that those dollars will be divided up with the charter schools?
That $478 million takes into account the fact that those dollars now would have to be shared with charter schools. But that amount looks like around $6 to $8 million per year, depending on, you know, what population might be.
All right. And I guess I'm very adamant about this for our kids because the areas where we are needing our schools based on where the population is growing and where our students are is not an area where we are seeing other schools wanting to go be in those areas to teach our children.
Okay.
We've been very blessed over the years. I mean, heaven help us. We've had a great working relationship with our charter schools, and I'm appreciative of all that they do. They've assisted us with the student growth, you know, and it's worked, and we've been an amazing county of choice. But in the process of this, and this is not a slam against anyone except probably our legislative group in Tallahassee, and not necessarily our delegation, but it is a problem because there is not the foresight to see that we are not seeing other people actively engaged in meeting the needs of our students where the needs are. And we have got to stay on top of that. And I want all of our students to have an amazing facility to go into that they can learn, they can be safe in. And we are 4 years too late in doing this because that rotation schedule has caused us to be very delayed in meeting the needs of our schools, to keeping them up to par and up to snuff. And I truly believe that the time is over. We have got to do something to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our kids. And I don't see any reprieve coming from the state. And so I believe it's time for us as a community to gather around. We're no longer the community where people are gathering together to help build the school in the 1800s and where everybody just automatically pays and the whole community would pay in their own individual money. We're not in that state, in that situation anymore. And this is time. It is late, and we need to move forward as quickly as possible.
And we need to move on, so
Yes.
let's
So
just.
I am sorry.
No, that's okay. That's a good conclusion, but let's just go around and talk about individual board members, what direction they would like to give the superintendent.
Yes. Okay, so can we?
Before
please,
that, I'd
yes.
like
Yes.
to go to, what is the projected duration of this sales tax?
Let's get
Yeah,
through
we'll
the
go in,
date.
order if we can, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's get
so
the date
let's go through the order if we may. So the date of the election, we have proposed May 15th, 2018, which is a Tuesday. So we would like just to know direction from the board. Are you comfortable with that date? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know if Mary Fisher has mentioned anything regarding the date in her email.
She did not provide me any comments on that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So direction from the board, May 15th, 2018 is the date we're proposing for the special election. Comments, questions?
Mrs. Giovanelli?
I can't support my May election.
Okay.
Okay. Other comments?
No,
Let's
I
go
don't
on
support.
to
Okay.
duration.
All right, duration. We have proposed a 10-year period from commencing January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2028 would be the duration of the sales tax, should it go forward. So questions or comments on the 10-year duration as proposed? Mrs. Morgan?
Now, I would like the superintendent to address the issue of 5 versus 10 years, because I think there's a strong argument to be made for 10 as opposed to 5, which is what we had, I think, been thinking about as a board for quite a while.
Well, first of all, I think that if you look at our projections that come out of planning growth capacity, we believe that those are going to stay fairly steady over the next decade. So the need for construction is not going to change in that term. Additionally, if you do 5 years, you're literally you don't have all your list that we need done, that we know that we need done, completed by the end of that 5 years. So we're back at it. Very quick turnaround to come right back at it and get approval so that we can complete that list of construction that needs to take place. And I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I think that about sums it up. That length of time, because we're talking about projects that are long in length. We know we have a schedule of where we need to concentrate on deferred maintenance and make those up, and the length of time it's going to take to get these, the most critical things done. 10 years makes a lot more sense than 5, because by the time you get through a process such as this, very shortly after that, you're out of your planning window to get those projects done, and your 5 years is going to be up before you can do that. So 10 years just makes more sense when you're talking about these long-term type projects.
And we would refer you to your backup. You have a proposed project list as part of your backup materials.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to kind of piggyback on a comment that Ms. Giovanelli mentioned earlier, typically when I do agree that I don't know if 10 years will take care of it, but typically then what happens in a lot of the districts, it is my understanding, they do the referendum. If there is still a need, if they see they need to go forward, if there are any changes they may want to recommend, then they go ahead and they bring the referendum back for the voters for those projected needs. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. They do have the opportunity to renew, and we would go back to the voters as a district at the end of that duration, or toward the end of that 10-year period. Yes. Okay. Ms. Katrika?
When I first heard 10 years, my initial reaction was alarm. That's a really long time. And then I looked at the numbers. Of the 61 counties that have passed a half-penny sales tax, the shortest sunset time frame is 5 years. The longest sunset time frame is 50 years. The 5 years, that's only 2 counties. The 50 years, that's 3 counties. Now, I believe that 50 years also includes in it some reapprovals of referendums that already existed. If you look at the number of times a 10-year sunset occurs in other counties, 9 other counties have a 10-year sunset. And then the next most frequently occurring sunset timeframe is 20 years with 6 counties. I think 5 years would be too short, given the fact that it would only generate $250 million at a conservative estimate of $50 million a year. That's not enough to meet our need. $500 million is certainly closer to meeting our need. The other thing that I want us to think about, and this was something that a constituent brought up to me, is that a 15-year sunset would actually give us the ability and give taxpayers and voters the ability to analyze our use of those funds over a generation of students. So if a student enters in kindergarten, it's 13 years to get through the system, 15 years is closer to that time frame. Voters could look and analyze an entire class of students going through the system at the end of a 15-year period and say, yes, we like what you've done, no, we haven't, in terms of approving an extension of that referendum. Am I making sense?
Okay. Yes, Ms. LaRiviere.
Just a thought. Okay. So, do any of them do it as at the end of a 14-year term rather than a numbers 5 increments of 5? Because I look at it and I think about if we do it, well, 10 years from now, it would be another natural election period. And possibly then, once people have seen what we've done, and it won't be the same year as Constitution revision, it won't be as complex. 10 years from now, it probably wouldn't even involve a special election. But if we do a 15-year, it would have to be a special election because it would be a year that there are no elections except for, do we have any city elections that happen in the odd number years?
It could potentially.
Yes.
Yeah, but still we're not hitting all the districts. Right. So, so that's just a thought. If I agree.
There's a couple counties that have wacky timeframes, like 7 years, 9 years. I want to say there was one 13, 23 years, 39 years. I can't remember the exact numbers. There are a couple counties that have those, but the overwhelming majority of counties that have approved the tax, it's been a nice round number. And the other thing too is if we approve this for 15 years and we decide that we want the reapproval to be put on a primary or general election ballot, we can bring it up a year before it expires and decide to put it on, before it expires, decide to put it on the primary or the general election ballot.
Thank you.
So that's not.
Thank you.
Okay, so there has been a thought around 15 years,
No,
10
that's
years.
good
I'd like to hear
conversation.
from some other board members. How are you feeling about this?
Not
Mr.
married to
Toiber.
the 15 years. I
Okay.
just wanted to throw it out there for
Yep.
discussion.
Mr. Toiber?
I agree with Ms. Patrica. You know, 5 years I think is a little bit too short. 10 years, even though it's substantial, I think, you know, this board has talked about, you know, at a quarterly or at least, you know, biannually putting out a full page in the news press to say exactly this is what we said the money would be spent on, this is what we're spending on, to be able to do that in a regular format. And so I think if we do that, I think 10 years is a prudent time period that allows us to do to get us back. We can't recover from the amount of money that's been shorted for the last 6 years. We can't put those replacements to get ourselves back with our buses and our roofing, our HVAC, and our technology infrastructure, all those things. 5 years is just, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I think 10 years is a prudent. 15 years, again, the reactional thing, I just can't get my head wrapped around 15 years.
Okay. Other thoughts? Okay,
So we are at
10.
10,
10 years?
10. Ms. LaRiviere, Ms. Giovanelli,
I'll support that if that's what y'all decide.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
Next up is project list categories. So in your backup materials, you do have a listing of the projects, and I'm going to ask for a little help from Mr. Sill up there, if he can go ahead and display that for us.
Now, and we've gone through this
Yes.
several times.
So we would just like to hear some feedback relative to the categories and hear about questions you may have or voices of support. It's at the very end, Mr. Sill.
They're necessities.
Yeah.
If I can make just a couple of comments about the project list once he gets it up. Keep
Keep
going.
going. It's toward the end of the agenda. Thank you, sir.
Yep, there it is
There
right
you
there.
go.
Yeah.
Move up just a little bit.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments about the list. We have gotten together with all of the,
One more.
Yeah.
There you go.
Page 1. Thank you, sir.
thank you, all of the relevant departments within the district, maintenance, facilities, safety and security, technology, You see the comprehensive list here. We are still working on this because we want to make sure that legally everything is in line. So we're still working with Keith Martin, with another outside attorney, to make sure that the final project list is exactly in hand the way we need it to be. But this is, this is the list as of now. There will be, and we're still working on a few revisions to it, so we'll be getting out a new updated version of this to you very shortly. But substantially, the things that you see on here will continue to remain. We're trying to figure out the best way to place this within the resolution that the board will do, and then also package it for information to the public to know, so for everybody to know exactly what will happen. So we're trying to figure out the most user-friendly way to do that as well, and there'll probably be several different versions of it. And so we'll be looking for help from our consultants that we work with, as well as from the board, for some weigh-in as to what pieces of information you feel are most valuable to all of us and to you as you go out to communicate these things.
So these are recommendations in terms of categories being brought forward, and we would just like your reaction. Do you feel comfortable with essentially the categories? Are there other categories that you may want to see? And remembering that all of this needs to be within the realm of capital funding.
Right.
So hearing no other conversation around that, we're going to move forward. The next item is a desire for oversight committee, and Mr. Sill, we can return to the PowerPoint, please. Thank you. So there was some conversation about an oversight committee. So basically what several other districts have done is provided a community group. Recommendations come from the board members typically. You may recommend one or two community members to serve on this oversight committee. Dr. Atkins may also have the opportunity to submit a few community members. Their primary job is to provide oversight, to take a look at the final project list, and to prepare for the community an annual report, and to provide feedback to us. How well are we doing with moving forward with those projects? Are we staying on point? Are we staying on plan? And if that's not happening, then we certainly want to know that as well. And that report would be published annually to the community. So, conversation about an oversight committee and your desire to have one. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, oversight committee. Yes, not that question. And is it possible for there to be some way that they communicate to the public more than just once a year?
Yes, absolutely. And we can set that parameter up as you direct us to do that.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
To me, it's a no-brainer. I can't support this without an oversight committee.
It's a necessity.
I think that the conversation comes in who do we have on that? And how are those people appointed, and making sure that they have a level of financial knowledge that they can bring so that they can help us be transparent with the public.
Okay. So the idea that we've seen in a number of districts is there would be 2 appointees per board member, and then the superintendent would also have an opportunity to appoint. Many times you'll see a number like 15, an odd number, just so you have some opportunity for discussion and then voting. So there's clear decision-making on that committee. So our recommendation, would be 2 committee members per board member, with 1 from the superintendent. And those would be purely community members from Lee County.
Do we want to commit to making sure that we have membership from specific organizations in the community, like the Horizon Council, perhaps the tourism industry, realtors, builders? So rather than us appointing 2, do we want to come up with a list of organizations that should always be represented on that council, and then give us the opportunity? Because different people will come onto this board with different political agendas, unfortunately, and they might not appoint people with financial acumen. And in choosing specific groups that are important to this community, and making sure they have a voice on that committee, then we can ensure that we have at least that segment of the community represented. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, I think we need more discussion about that.
Yeah.
Because I think our advisory committees have to be considered in all of that as well.
So membership
Agreed.
would be addressed through the policy that you would adopt. It would be addressed, of course, in the resolution, other than the commitment to have such a committee and its purpose.
Okay.
But the details would be ironed out in a policy that would be developed and adopted after passage of the,
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Martin, your recommendation then would be that staff would bring forward a recommended policy relative to this for the board's consideration?
Yes,
After
at
the
that
vote.
later time,
After the vote is.
correct.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think the process would be not unlike what we did to develop our strategic plan. We had quite an extensive process to develop the community group that did our strategic plan, and we were, it was quite
Right.
done with a lot of fidelity, and I think that was the success of our strategic plan, the fact that we had all our community and the power that we brought from all our, the people that we have. We have amazing resources in our community. I think that, we should not rush that process of picking that committee. So when that committee gets picked, everybody in the community goes, yeah, that group has the respect and the accountability that the community's looking for.
Yeah, we need to put a lot of thought into that.
Okay, so we will bring forward that for another time at this point, but we do hear support for at least the fact that you would like to have an oversight committee. Okay. All right, so moving on to really the last part of our presentation or our discussion today is next steps. So the consensus that we've heard the majority of the board would like to move forward with a resolution. So the superintendent and staff will be bringing that forward to you at your meeting, your next available meeting. From there, once the board makes a decision relative to the resolution at an action meeting, then the Board of County Commissioners would be notified, and the process relative to placing this on a special election ballot would commence. They would communicate with the supervisor of elections. As far as our staff is concerned, there's a myriad of responsibilities that we would need to start talking about in terms of communication plans, working with the media, working with our community groups, and making sure that the message gets out as you intended. And then certainly the level of community involvement, not only the potential for the oversight committee, but also engaging our community in this conversation. So that's really what we see as the next steps. Anything else we have missed? Any other next steps you recommend? All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. We're going to turn it over to Mrs. Morgan at this point for any closing comments, and thank you.
And I think we'll just go around. We'll start with Dr. Kuckel.
Well, it's something we've been talking about for a long, long, long time in terms of our need to accommodate the students, our growth needs. And I'm so glad that we brought it to the table because, as Mr. Teuber mentioned, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, that we knew the problem existed and we let it go. And I'm really excited about the process that we've had today. Thank you, Ms. Patrica, for all of the background information that you have brought to the table. Very much a part of our decision-making today and very important to the direction that we take in the future. And I'm really proud of the school district for moving forward. Dr. Atkins, you've been on top of this and you've brought us along piece by piece, and that's why we're here today and we know what's happening and we're ready to move forward. And all of the board members, I just sit here with such pride with everything that people have, the questions that we've brought, the solutions, the conversation has been very good. That is what we're all about. Transparency is what we're all about, and I'm happy to see all the folks in the audience that are here today. And now to move forward with getting this out to the whole community, it's for our students, and that's the bottom line of everything that we try to do. And I'm excited about this. I'm not a good campaigner for this kind of thing, but I'll be there when you need me.
Thank you.
Ms. LaRiviere?
Yes. I will say ditto to everything that Dr. Kuckel said, and again, it's about providing information about our needs and making people aware. I will not be telling people how to vote. My goal is to say, this is where we are, here's an option. It's up to you now to decide what you believe is in the best interest of our students. And I am looking forward to sharing and having those conversations and more. So, and I have to say, I'm so proud of our board. I'm proud of us because we can disagree and still have good conversations and good discourse. And That's wonderful. I hope that other people within all of our society could pick up this same habit and strategy, and all they do.
I think I've said enough. But just for, as a good of the order issue, I'd like to let my fellow board members know that I've been asked to go to Tallahassee on Friday, testify in front of the Constitutional Review Commission. I've already informed our chair that I'll be heading up there to do that.
Good.
I felt that it was proper form to let you know as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Hill.
In me trying to research and do my homework, I had asked for, before Christmas break, I'd asked for just budget information because I think it was important for me to just comprehend and understand what we budgeted for and what we actually spent and expenditures. I was supposed to, and apparently it's a lot of time involved. That's like 4.5 hours, so I'd have to go through the group, so I never was able to get that information. I have since asked Dr. Atkins for it, and he was working on it. So that would be information that would still be helpful for me, just like what we planned on budgeting and what we, because it's just kind of simple, but that's how I operate. So what we planned on spending and what we actually spent, because I think in the end, I know we spend more than we plan. It happens in my life. So, because there's things that happen like a hurricane that we weren't planning on. So that information, I still would like to have that information. Hopefully it won't take 4.5 hours to get. It was something that I was not provided, and I would like to have that to still help me decide. We have to still take a vote, so, that's what I would like to do, and I look forward to that information.
I'm not clear on what it is you're asking for.
Well, just like for a perfect example, like maintenance. So we budgeted a certain amount of money for maintenance, and what did we spend at the end of the year? I wanted this from 2016. I don't need it for what we have in 17, because I know it's information that's behind. So I want to know what we spent and what we budgeted for. Obviously, we're going in the hole every day, so why not know that? It's a simple thing. And it happens to even our food service. It happens in, what overtime we spent in transportation that we didn't plan on, what overtime we spent in paying for substitutes when we had teachers that were out sick or weren't able to return, and then it became a long-term thing, then they're still maybe on disability. I don't know. I'd like to see that information. I think it's important.
Mr. Toiber.
I think you might be confused, and I think by looking at
I know it's
Dr.
not
Desamore's
capital
face,
outlay.
I think she is
understand
too, but every year when we get our budget, the numbers for last year's budget is presented to us, and it shows us our unallocated funds and our allocated funds per line item by the Red Book. And so that numbers are all available for last year's budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Desamore, and we don't overspend, we don't go over our budget, and if it is, it's clearly delineated in that report. And so I think that the information is available because we see it every year. So I'm not understanding exactly what you're looking for. Are you looking for a by line item?
Yes.
Or it's all there, and we see it every year, and when it gets briefed in May, and we get it
The
briefed again in
overtime.
September, yeah.
'Cause I took the
Well,
budget
and
home.
again, you're drilling down by line item, particular overtime. Overtime is in operation costs
I know.
based upon the line item by either by
not.
school or by activity. It's all in a line item, and so you have to just drill down, and you can see, but we don't, I'll let Dr. Desamore explain it more.
And then also one other question too was, what do we actually have in reserves?
It sounds to me that there's real confusion about what the actual request is. And, in terms of the perception that we are always going in the hole is grossly inaccurate. I mean, it's just the opposite. We have to stay within the board-approved budget. Overtime is a planned expense, so we do have overtime. Lapse factor is is something that we plan. What lapse factor is if we have a vacancy, Dr. Desamore's plans to cover that vacancy with a substitute. Now, often there's actually a savings that comes out of that. If you look at, for example, some of our unfilled vacancies that we either haven't been able to fill or we've chosen not to fill, those are dollars that we budgeted this particular year, but we didn't spend those dollars. An example that we're all aware of is Executive Director for Government and Community Relations. That was a position that was budgeted at a significant a dollar amount, but we have yet to fill that position, so those dollars are really part of what we call lapse. So, we're required to have a balanced budget, and where where I would say we have to borrow money is obviously on the capital side of the house.
Right.
And that's, again, has to be a balanced budget that's approved. We go out and we borrow X amount of dollars, and we come to the board for approval of that, and we have to spend no more than those dollars that we are approved to spend. So, and we do that every single year. And as Mr. Toiber said, if you look at the budget book that Dr. Desamore's division is recognized across the state as as really providing an excellent presentation overall in terms of our budget. Producing the book that we all receive every single year, which really provides a lot of detail. So it appears to me, and maybe the original request that went to communications, I understand there's an estimate of that, and maybe there was just a misunderstanding between what was requested or not. If there is a request, in terms of specifically right now today, I could see that taking some time, because you'd have to go in and dig that out, and that would take maybe the 4 hours or whatever. So.
My initial request was just for transportation, and that's because we had in July we had requested the hedge funds, and then we didn't purchase that at that time. So what did that cost us? That additional cost when we didn't purchase it timely, because I know that was a certain price that we got it at a discount, and when you buy it, if you buy it within that time, then you get the value. But otherwise, when you don't, then you don't get that value. So that was really my main thing that I was trying to figure out, what did it actually cost us.
Well, and first of all, in terms of the hedge, remember that hedge funding is something that we have never ever done as a school district, and I think that our district staff in our budget department or budget division, the finance division, really wanted to make sure that they did that accurately, that they took the time necessary to research something such as a hedge, because again, that is taking a chance. That is taking a risk. And so we were very prudent to study that risk and get advice from our advisors. So I do not, there are some out there in the public that wish to make it appear as if we somehow, lost savings. But I would argue that, first of all, this is an opportunity that's A, always available to us, and B, before at any time we put taxpayer dollars at risk, we better know that we're doing the right thing. So, in terms of what possibly could have happened if we moved at this date versus that date, I mean, we could look at an estimate there, I'm sure. But the bottom line is that a hedge is something that is not, often done, and it's something we have never done as a school district. And I would recommend that we would be prudent before we take such action. And I believe that's what our finance division did. So now, did we go over or under budget because of that? No. I mean, in fact, when it comes to fuel in general, we had a deal that was better than anyone else in the entire state, because our crew had worked so hard to get a really good price. And it was so good that finally the company decided to back away from it, and then we went out and got with the state bid and so forth, and still have an extremely good price. But we were better than everyone else. And the naysayers never want to give us credit for that, but that's the truth. The truth is that we had fuel at a lower cost than most. And, so, those are certainly things that we can get, but this misperception that's just a few people have, and that's the other thing we always have to take, and we have to remember that these are, there's just a few people that have this. It's just wrong. And when you look at what the facts are, I think it bears that out.
Yeah, that's all I need. Thank you.
Mr. Toiber, any closing comments?
No, thank you, ma'am.
And I will only say also that I'm very grateful for the long conversation that we've had, the thought that's been brought to it, and that we are reaching a conclusion. Mr. Martin, any comments?
Just for your information, there are statutory limitations on using public funds to advocate the passage of the sales tax, and the restrictions are very intricate, so I'll be providing you a memo addressing and explaining those limitations. And please, after you review that, feel free to contact me if you have any further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Atkins?
Well, just appreciate the board's leadership and courage on this particular issue. As you know, this is something that we as an organization have been looking at for some time. We had a difficult time in the district as we came out of this recession in terms of recovering. However, we do see as a state, the state has certainly started to recover from this, and revenue that is coming into the state is and continues to be on the increase, but revenues that come back to the district are really not at those same levels. And if you see the stark reality of a $200 million deficit, while we are growing at a rapid rate that we are continuing to grow, you definitely see that there is a need. Every child deserves a great education, a great opportunity, and I believe that the action you've taken today supports that for every kid. So thank you, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there any good of the order? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.